Start. Hi, uh, my name is George Mueller, and I'm glad to speak to you today. Just a few things I like to say before I start, and one of them is my real name. My name really is not George Mueller. My name is George Levy, and uh, when I came to this country from Europe, that was my name, George Levy. But when I came here, I changed my name to George Mueller. And for the next, that was in 1947 when I came. And not until the 1990s did I tell people about my past and my real name, including my own kids. I never told them anything about the war. They didn't know my real name until basically the 1990s. Maybe some of them knew a little bit about it before, but basically, no one really knew until the 1990s. So I had in mind changing my name back to George Levy, but it's too late now. So now my new name is really George Levy Mueller. The other thing I like to say is that I about the German people, I don't uh, dislike all the Germans or hate the Germans. After all, I was born in Germany myself, and I'm a German, raised in Germany originally, and I only when I say something against the German people, I mean the actual people that were guilty. So now I'll start from the beginning. I was born in 1930 in a town called Lippstadt. So that makes me in a couple of weeks 90 years old. And this was in northwestern Germany near the Dutch border. And we lived in a very nice house. And I had a father and a mother, and my grandparents lived upstairs. And my father had a store on the first floor of the building, and it was kind of a clothing store, and it was a big, very big house. And I had a nice upbringing, and I had a sister who was born in 1935. Her name is Ursula. And so I was a regular little kid. I played sports. I was on the soccer team uh, and on the track team and things like that. But in around 1937, 1938, started to change. And I really didn't understand what was going on. But the first thing that happened was in the school, the teachers changed from regular teachers to uniform teachers, the SA or the SR. There was the SS and the SA. The SA was more powerful in those days, but and they were kind of beaten by the SS. But these were the SA, and many of them were the school teachers, and they were real Nazis. And so the first thing that happened in my young life, then in first or second grade, I don't remember exactly. I was kicked off the uh, sports teams. I was on the soccer team and as well as track, and I couldn't do that anymore. And many times I had to go stand outside of the classroom when they were discussing something, and I was treated really different. I was the only Jewish kid in the class, I remember. And pretty soon, my life really changed. I got in fights all the time with during recess. They called me a dirty Jew, the kids, and things like that. And when I got in a fight, then I get back in the classroom, and then the teacher would actually hit me because I'm not supposed to be in a fight. And never again, never those kids. At night, I lay in bed, and I remember people standing around downstairs. I could hear sing songs. And one of the songs I still remember, and we'll be happy when the Jewish blood flows off of our knives. And so I asked my mother about these things, and she said, "Don't worry about it. Everything is going to be okay." Also, my father was arrested at the train station because he was, someone reported him. He was caught speaking to a Aryan woman about something, I don't know, at the train station. So he had to go to the police station, and all those kind of things. My mother had problems as well, and I couldn't figure out what was going on. And she just said, "Don't really worry about it." We did have some friends that stuck with us, and my mother was invited. Their name was Bernicke, and her son, Hans Bernicke, was my friend, and he remained my friend all the way through, even until a few years ago when he passed away. So those were the conditions. Uh, uh, when I was, let's say, around 8 years old, one day there was this big commotion at our house, and I said, "What's going on?" And my mother said, "We have to get out of the house." We were so forced to sell the house, I understand, to some high Nazi, and so we had to leave, and all the stuff in the store was either given away or sold, but I think it was mostly given away. I remember there were people standing around the corner waiting in line to get into the store to get stuff for nothing. And so now, where did we end up? We were not on the street. Now in Poland, they when they persecuted the Jews, this is just for instance, as an explanation, the Jewish people were forced out of their houses and put in ghettos. Now in Germany, they didn't have ghettos. So now where did we end up? So we ended up in a place called a Jew house, a Juden Haus. Excuse me one moment. Can you look at this for a second? I don't know what that is.
Oh, don't worry about that.
Oh, okay. So we ended up in a Jew house. Now, what is a Jew house? Well, there were other Jewish people living in this town called Lippstadt, and we moved in with them. Their name was Lichtenfels. They were friends of ours. I remember my parents used to have them over, and we'd go to their house. And so now, in this particular house, we were living with, I don't know how many families, but quite a few families. And it was very crowded, and they were all Jewish people. And this was in 1938 when I was 8 years old, and my sister was 3. And there were other kids, and it was crowded, and we lived in the, I slept in bed with other kids, and we just, I remember just living there. And then uh, in November, a terrible thing happened, Kristallnacht, or the night of the broken glass in English. And that was actually the time when officially everything, the anti-Semitism really became a big item. They came in the middle of the night. First of all, they burned most of the synagogues in Germany, and they destroyed Jewish businesses that were still in business. And another thing that they did was they came in the middle of the night in these Jew houses and arrested all the men. And so I didn't see this happen, but in the morning when I woke up, I came downstairs, and all the mothers were there. They were all sad and crying, and I asked my mother what happened, and so she told me that they came in the middle of the night and arrested all the men that were living there, including my father, Max, and his brother. I forgot to mention, but my father had several brothers and sisters, but one of his brothers, Ludwig was his name, and he lived with us, and so he also then came to this Jew house. And so They came in the middle of the night and arrested all over Germany, and they came to this house and arrested all the men. And I said, "Where are they?" And my mother said they went to Oranienburg, which is I think it was Oranienburg. Sometimes my memory isn't 100%. And so that was a concentration camp. I didn't know what concentration camps were. And so this was a very sad time, and all the mothers were crying, and everybody, and I was crying, of course. So now this is November, and 6 weeks later, they let all these men out. Now, why did they let them out? I don't know, but I think I'm speculating that this was very early in the time of World War II. Actually, there was no World War at the time, and so they arrested all these Jewish men, and they probably didn't know what to do with them, so they let them out. And so 6 weeks later, all these men that were in Oranienburg, at least, from Lippstadt, came back on the train and were let off in Lippstadt. And so I was there at the train and saw all these men getting off, and there was my father and my uncle Ludwig and all the other men. And my uncle Ludwig was able to walk, and many of the other men were able to walk, but my father was on a stretcher. So they brought him back into this house where we were living, this Jew house, and my father couldn't stand up. Both of his legs were frozen, and he sat all the time, and he was crying and so forth. And he looked really terrible, and couldn't move or anything. So they put him in a Catholic hospital in Lippstadt, and my mother and my sister Ursula, who I said was 8.5, so she was 3.5. We went to visit my father 2 or 3 times in the hospital, and I don't know if they amputated his legs, but I remember they were thinking about it, or it was mentioned. But he passed away immediately, like early January. He was maybe a couple of weeks after he came back from this camp, Oranienburg. The next thing, also on New Year's Day itself, we found my uncle Ludwig dead in the in his room, and so they buried him. And so now my mother decided, this is really dangerous. We have to get out of the country. This was now January 1939, and in September would be my birthday. So in September I would be 9 years old. So I was basically 8.5, something like that, and my sister 5 years younger. So my mother knew someone who was some type of a lawyer, who was a nice person, and he was nice to her. And she asked him to help her to come uh, to get her and her 2 children out of Germany. And so she gave him all of her pictures and all those things like that, and he saved them. And many, many years later, when I was in the United States Army in the 50s, I went to visit him, and he gave me a lot of material that my mother had given him. So this man was not able to get my mother out of Germany, but he was able to get her 2 kids out of Germany, my sister Ursula and me. So in February of 1939, I was now going on 9, and my sister was 5 years younger, 4. My mother put us on a train from Lippstadt to the Netherlands. Was a Kindertransport, and people know, I'm sure you know what a Kindertransport was. There was a train, all children, very, very crowded. And so I remember that was one of the saddest days in my life, really, that particular day. I mean, I've had been in camps and things like that, but this, when I think about it, was probably a very sad day because my mother uh, told me at the train, uh, I want you to take good care of your sister, and I'm going to come to Holland as soon as I can. And so the train moved, and I know this is very dramatic, but it's probably, like I said, the saddest day of my life. And the train moved, and she was waving, and I was waving, and she was getting smaller and smaller. And that's the last time I saw her. So now we ended up in Holland, my sister and I. This was 1939. I was, let's say, 9, and she was 4. Uh, and I'll skip a lot of the stuff, but we ended up in Rotterdam and in a big children orphanage, all people that had fled, kids from Germany and places. But finally, we ended up in a little town called Eersel, and it's spelled E-E-R like in Romeo, S-E-L, in the south of Holland, not too far from the Belgian border. And there we lived in a convent. We ended up in a convent with other children from Germany, and there were also Dutch kids there that used to come every 6 weeks for fresh air and things like that. And now this town Eersel is I consider that my hometown, even though Lippstadt in Germany is my hometown. I always say I'm from Eersel, and I have many friends there, and all my kids go there. They have friends there, and I feel this is really my hometown. So we were living in this convent, and this was still 1939, and I was going to school there, and to the boys' school in town. It's a small little village with mostly farmers, but a beautiful little town, and uh, and I liked it there, but of course I missed my mother, and I didn't like to live like in an orphanage and things like that. But it was okay. So I also made local friends, and the best friend of my life actually lived very close by there. He was a Dutch kid, and his name was Chefke Bloks. Doesn't matter, and he was my best friend in life, and he's been here many times, or not many times, once or twice, and I visited him many times. So uh, this was 1939. Now, in 1940, the next year that we were there, Germany invaded Holland, Belgium, France, all those countries. They invaded Holland, and in 5 days they defeated Holland. And now what happened was, now the same thing that was in Germany now happened in Holland or the Netherlands. They put pro-German people in the police department as chief of police, and they made all the mayors in all the towns, including this town of Eersel. The mayor was a big German. It was a Dutch guy, but pro-German. Uh, and so all the laws now changed just like they were in Germany, the anti-Semitic laws. For instance, if you were a teacher, a Jewish teacher, you couldn't teach. And they made different laws against the Jews. That's how it started out slowly. And even Jews couldn't go to the movies. But they had a little movie theater there, and so my friends, Chefke Blocks and all these other, we snuck into the movie theater anyway. But they made all the laws against Jews. Uh, Now the war started to come, and the nuns became actually resistance fighters. They became they were part of the Dutch underground, and they would hide. Let's say if an American flyer or an English pilot or something was shot down, the Dutch underground would try to save these people, and many times did, and then many times they were, if it was in the neighborhood of where we were living, these pilots and other people like that then would be brought to this convent, and would be hidden there for a while, and then they would be taken by the Dutch underground through Belgium, France, Spain, over the mountains to Spain, and then back to England. So, but whenever the Nazis, or I say Germans or Nazis, whenever they couldn't find, let's say, a pilot that got shot down or anything, they knew that he was being hidden by somebody. And so then they would grab two men off the street, young men in the usually 20s, 30s, that they kept special for that, and shoot them. And yet the nuns would keep doing that and fight against that. And I've written a book about this, and I went into more detail what happened, but I'll just go on to the next thing. So in 1943, Mother Superior came to me and said, I want to talk to you and your sister. So I went, they put me in this special room, and Mother Superior came in, and she said that she had something to tell me, and I said, what is it? And she said that the next day she was forced by the chief of police, his name was Klaassen, to hand us over to the police. Two policemen would come and would take my sister and me to a concentration camp called Vught. Now, when I heard that, I was really shook up, because before that we had been in hiding here and there, but I was really shook up when they said concentration camp, because I remember my father, what he looked like, and my uncle Ludwig. And of course I started to cry. This was in 1983, so I was 13 years old by now, and my sister was 8. So she says she was sorry, but she couldn't do anything about it. And so the guy that ordered this, his name was Mr. Klaassen, and he was the chief of police, and he lived on the convent grounds in a house that was owned by the convent. And after the war, he asked me for forgiveness, and I played with his kids, and I said, yes, I'll forgive you, or it wasn't your fault. But I never felt good about it, and I couldn't play with his kids anymore either. And one of them even came to the United States about 10 years ago, and wanted to visit with me and stay overnight, and I said I couldn't do it, although he was my age. So anyway, the next day, um, two policemen came in plain clothes, and they had a cab, and they wore plain clothes, they told me, so that we wouldn't look like two criminals, them dressed up as policemen. And so they were going to now take us to this next camp, Vught, Vught. That's also a name of a town, and it's maybe about 40 miles away. But before we went to Vught, excuse me, we stopped off in a town called Den Bosch, or 's-Hertogenbosch. This is the capital of this region where we lived. And there lived a man that I have to be thankful to for the rest of my life. His name is Jos van Mecklenburg. And I'm still friends with his kids and his grandkids, and on the computer and everything. And I've seen them several times when I go there. And Jos van Mecklenburg was a man that belonged to the Dutch underground, and or I don't know if he really belonged to them, but he did a lot of work for them, and he was a real patriot, and he was in charge of me and my sister. He was like our guardian, and he told. Then it's too complicated to explain how that became so, but he was our guardian, and so we went to see him, and I in his office, and I started to cry. Of course, excuse me, I didn't want to go to a camp, and he said he would do everything and anything to get us out. And so now I felt a little better. And so the camp was maybe only about 15, 20 miles from where he lived in the big town of Sertogenbos. So the two policemen came, took me back in the car, me and my sister, and we ended up then in our first camp, Vught, Vught. So I'll mention a couple of things about my first impression. So we drove through the gate, and the two policemen dropped us off and said goodbye. By the way, those two cops also asked for forgiveness for what they did at the end of the war, and I forgave them. What am I going to do? My sister and I stood on the inside in Vught, and there I'll mention a couple of the first impressions. The first thing I saw was a bunch of SS guys, young guys. They were the guards there, and they were laughing and carrying on, and they had rifles or guns, and they were shooting them in the air and laughing and stuff. And we were just standing there. I was 13 years old, and my sister was 8. No one said anything to us, and we just stood there. And then all of a sudden there was this SS man on a bicycle, and we had a special name for him. We called him at Knuppeltje. He would look like he was about 70 years old, and he had a uniform on, and he was. Later on, I found out he was probably the meanest guard there. But we were standing there, and a few feet away, some prisoner was there, and this guy Knuppeltje jumped off his bicycle, and he had a big piece of wood, not a bat, but just a piece of wood, and he started beating on this guy until he was on the ground, and still kept on beating him, and no one told him to stop, and that's the first thing I saw. And I, of course, was really shook up, and my sister was too. She was 5 years younger. I was 13, and she was 8. So no one said anything, and so lady came, and she said, "Are you and George and Ursula Levy?" And I said, "Yeah, Levy." And I said, "Yes." She says, "Come with me." And it turned out that she was, excuse me, she was a, a woman, Jewish woman in a Jewish women's camp. And so she took us then to the women's camp, the Jewish women's camp. There was a Jewish men's camp, a Jewish women's camp. There was some other designations of different type of prisoners. So then my sister and I, this was 1943, so I was 13, and my sister was 8. We were then in the women's camp. So now I'll mention a couple of things about the camp. It was naturally very crowded and sad, and stank, and the food was bad. And every day we had to stand at appel, which means like in the army, you stand at reveille, and they count you for hours and hours and hours while you're standing there. And in the women's camp, it was the woman SS that counted you, and most of them were Dutch SS. They were women. In the men's camp, the men did it, but they also had some men SS. They were all from Germany. And then after that, people had to go to work, but I didn't have to work because I was not old enough. And so most of the day I would be hiding someplace. And I even found an empty barracks, and they had a piano. And so I used to play the piano for my sister a little bit. And so, and actually try to teach her. But there was a lot of bad things happened. The food was very, very bad. The barracks were very, very bad. Uh, and there were beatings. People were getting beat up all the time. And I noticed there were no mirrors, but I noticed that when I looked at the inside of my thigh, after a while, I noticed there was like a kind of like a cave, my leg, and I must have been losing a lot of weight because my legs were like that, and so it was. I had to take showers, and since I was in the women's barracks, I had to take showers with women. And the German guards used to make fun of that and all those kind of things. And like I said, there were beatings. There were like, we could see the men's barracks. And for a while, I was sent into the men's camp. And of course, that was very hard on my sister and also me, but very hard on her. And then they transferred me back to the women's camp. And so, but the worst thing in this camp, I'll mention, besides all the beatings and things, was that every so often there was a transport of so many people. Their names were called off, and they then had to go on a transport, and they usually went to a place called Westerbork, and from Westerbork, then they either went to Germany or to Poland, and many times they would be. Uh, when they went to Poland, they went to Auschwitz and places like that. I was going to say something about how I ended up not in. Oh yeah, there. So these transports was very terrible. This was one of the worst things that I could see in this camp. Besides all the beatings and things like that, and the 25 lashes that people would get, and then people would have to stand around and listen to while he count eins, zwei, all the way to 25. But one of the worst things was when they announced that there would be a transport of so many men having to go to on a transport to Westerbork and then to Poland, or so many women. And then the Nazis would say, well, we'll give you 15 minutes to say goodbye to your family. And so I used to watch that. And that to me was one of the worst things I've ever seen, because I didn't have to work and I could just watch these things, and the mothers and wives would say goodbye to their husbands who would be sent away to another camp or vice versa, and this was really, really sad. And so this was one of the saddest things. My sister and I were almost once on a transport, but I don't have time to go into this, but we got off the transport because Mr. Van Mecklenburg somehow saved us not to go on this transport. They sent every child from Westerbork, from Vught, except five, like 1,300 children, and sent them to a place called Sobibor. And when they got there, they were all killed, and there were only five people left in Bergen-Belsen, in Vught, and my sister and I were two of those children. And Mr. Van Mecklenburg is responsible for saving us, that we weren't under transport, and I won't have time to go into how this happened, but it's in the book that I wrote. Okay, now in October of 1943, my sister and I did get on a transport, and we were sent to a place called Westerbork, which was basically a camp just where they keep you for a while and then they sent you to other places. So we stayed there from 1943 December or October till January of 1944. Basically, the big thing that happened there was very overcrowded. There were not too many beatings. So we were just living there. The food was, of course, terrible. But the worst part was that every week, uh, a list of people that would be sent on a transport away would come up on the wall, and like I don't know how many people, but many of them. And if your name wasn't on it, then you felt good. Then you had another week not have to worry until next week. If your name was on it, then you know that was bad. So finally, our name got on one of those transports lists in January of 1944. I was now going on 14, and my 5 years younger, and we didn't end up in Poland or Auschwitz or anything like that, but we ended up in a place called Bergen-Belsen in Germany, which is a big camp. And actually, President time went over there when he was president and gave a speech. At first, we were treated a little better. We were called Austauschjuden, exchange Jews. We had some kind of thing that we might have a connection in the United States, or we were Catholic, or something like that. And so they were going to keep us a little bit better off at first, um, in case in case they want to exchange us for German prisoners. But that didn't last very long, and after a while, this camp became a real concentration camp. We were where we were, and it was very, uh, let's say, unpleasant. One good thing was that my sister and I were always together. I was able to keep her with me in the men's barracks, and we slept in the same bed. And the beds were one, two, three, one on the floor bottom, one on the top, one on the middle, one on the top, and she and I slept in the same bed, uh, feet touching feet. I remember she wet her bed every night. We had lice crawling all over our bodies. The guy next to you might be dead the next morning, which happened many times. And there wasn't time to go to the bathroom or anything like that. You went on the floor, and we didn't have any heat, and many people died. And during the day, we would have to stand at appel again for hours and hours and hours. And appel means they count you, and they would beat people. And not only the Nazis, the Germans would beat people, but they had capos. Capos are people that work for the prisoners themselves, that work for the Germans, and they would do a lot of the beating. And we had two capos that were Russian, uh, Ukrainian murderers. They were actually murderers, and they became capos in Bergen-Belsen, and they would do a lot of the beating. And while we were standing at appel, this guy would beat a person standing right to the side of me, just the next row, and beat him and beat him and beat him. And uh, the German guard right there finally told this capo, "Now you just stop. That's enough." And people died. You'd be talking to somebody, and all of a sudden he'd let out a big loud yell, and would die. And then we would have to we were in the men's camp, and so we put all the men, uh, put them on on the side of the barracks, and by the end of the week or 2 weeks, the entire length of the barracks would be dead bodies sticking out, feet sticking out, heads up against the barracks, and they would be all naked. Why would they be naked? Because we would take their clothes. If we didn't have warm clothes or shoes with holes in them, if I could find a pair of shoes on some dead person, I would wear them. And then once a week or once every 2 weeks, a garbage detail would come and would grab. These men would, from the garbage detail, would grab the whole of these bodies and just fling them up on the truck, and there would be like a haystack, all dead bodies, and they go to the next compound. And I found out later was Anne Frank. She was transferred from Germany with her mother and her sister to. I remember when they came, but of course I didn't know it was Anne Frank. It was all women from Auschwitz. Now I could go on and on and on this kind of stuff, and I read it, wrote it in the book. However, you know all about these things. I would like to say two good things. No, the war was going to uh, end in favor of us. We knew all we had to do was hang on, and I knew we knew everything. We knew about Normandy. We knew about where the Russians were coming. Every day the skies would be black with American airplanes flying over, bombers, and I knew that I was 100% sure that we're going to get out of here. As all we had to do was stay alive, and that the Germans were losing the war. Also, I like to say, not everything was bad. There was something good. One time I was so hungry and I went up to a guard at night that was there, and I said, he put his gun out, and he asked me what I wanted, and I said, I'm so hungry, I got to have something to eat. And I have a little sister in the men's barracks. Can you have anything to eat for me? He said, come back tomorrow night. And he gave me a piece of bread. That's all he could spare. One slice of. I shared it with my sister. Now, the reason I'm saying this is that I talked, it was so bad and everything, but you still live, you still have hope. And I found this man who actually gave me a piece of bread, who was a guard. And after I looked at him, he was maybe only about 4 or 5 years older than me. So I could go on some more, but I want to finish on time. So in 1945, early 1945, my sister and I got on another transport. And this was a train that has its own name. It's called the Lost Transport. They had 3 transports at that time, and the first transport was made its destination, which was in Theresienstadt in Poland or someplace. The second was captured by the Americans or the British, I don't remember. And the third transport was us. It's called the Lost Transport, because we spent 13 days on this train without food. They let us off the train, and we could go in if there was a farm nearby or something, we could steal a apple from the year before. Of course, this was springtime, but I would always have to maybe eat even old grass, anything like that. So we spent 13 days on this train, and so many people died that there were 2,500 people on the train, and I think 500 died in 13 days, and they had to be put on the side of the road, and sometimes we had to bury them. After 13 days, this woman yelled, "Hey, we're free, we're free." And I looked out, and there were the Russian soldiers, and they had captured the train. And so we asked them, what can we do now? Most of the people couldn't even walk. They were so weak and everything. So there was a town nearby there called Turbitz, and we all went to Turbitz. I walked, and my sister and I walked, and the town was a ghost town. All the German people that lived there had afraid of the Russians. They fled over to the side of the Americans, and so my sister and I just took over a house there, and we stayed living there by the Russians. And the things happened there, different things, which I won't go into. It's all in the book. And we stayed there for 2-3 months. They deloused us. There was a big epidemic of typhus there, and many people died from typhus. And after about 3 months or so, we were able to get back to the American side, and we ended up in Germany, in Leipzig, which was an American base at that time, and I really enjoyed myself there, and they gave us plenty of food, and I don't know how long I stayed there, and then we went on this big, long, crowded train back to the Netherlands, and we were in the south of Holland, and I was sick, and so they put me in an army hospital, and I don't know how long I was there, and finally, one day the doctor came, American Army Hospital. The doctor said, "You're okay now. You can go wherever you want to go." And so he said, "Go to the orderly room and go get your sister, who was always right there, and get some money from the army." And they gave me some money. And so there we were on the street in the south of Holland, near the Belgian border. And I said, "What are we going to do now?" We didn't know where my mother was, or didn't know anything. So we decided to go back to visit Mr. Van Mecklenburg. So we jumped on a train and we went back to Mr. Van Mecklenburg, sat over in Boston. It was a beautiful day. The sun was shining and the bells were ringing. There must have been some kind of a holiday. And we knocked on the door, and they at 125 Hindhammer Street, 129 Hindhammer Straat. They said, "Who is it?" I said, "They're upstairs. It's George and Ursula." And there was Mr. Van Mecklenburg and his family. And they opened the door, and they were so glad to see us. And he knew we were alive, but he didn't know where we were all this time while we were with the Russians and with the Americans. And so this was 1945, when I was 15 and my sister was 10. And then we spent 2 years in Holland. I spent time in a hospital and things like that. And in 1947, we came to the United States, and I lived with my uncle and aunt here in Chicago. So did my sister. And then I went to college. Then I got drafted in the Army. I got a lot of benefits from that. And now I live in Glen Ellen, have been living here since how long? A long time. 70 years or so. The year President Kennedy got shot, we moved to Glen Ellen. And we still live in Glen Ellen, and I have 5 children, 4 daughters, and how many grandchildren? Oh, we got 15 grandchildren and 4 great grandchildren, and they're all doing good, and everybody's happy, and I'm doing fine, and we're healthy, and we're still married, and that's the end of my story. And I thank you very much. I hope I wasn't too confusing. If there are any questions, I'll be glad to answer them.
Okay, so there's one question from Courtney. She says, "Do you remember the Nazis tried to march on Skokie? And how did you get involved with the museum?"
Okay, I remember the Nazis marching on Skokie, and it was scary for me. Anything like that is scary. And how did I get involved with the museum? I decided somebody knew about my background, and a teacher, and she asked me, would I come to her class? And I said, "No, I don't do that kind of stuff." this was many years ago in the 90s. And she kept on asking me, and finally, so I did. And then I never stopped. And I go around to all the schools, not now, because of the virus. And so then my wife said, "You should go to the museum. Um, they probably would like to hear you speak." And so I did, and that's how I got involved then with the museum.
So another question, how long have you been married and what is your marriage advice?
What's my marriage advice? Well, I could be kind of funny about that, but I've been married this year, how long?
65?
65 years. And we're still married. And what is my advice? Well, do as you're told. No, I'm kidding. Just be considerate. And we're all human beings, and sometimes I'm not considerate. And but basically, be considerate and try to do the right thing.
Okay, do you still experience anti-Semitism and what do you say to Holocaust deniers?
Do I still experience anti-Semitism, and what do I say to Holocaust deniers? I do not experience any anti-Semitism personally, maybe because they know my background, uh, but I see it on the computer and things like that. Uh, but I personally don't have any problem with anti-Semitism. And if I should come across something like that, I'll think, does this guy know what he's talking about? If he really does, then I won't have anything to do with him. But I usually don't experience it. And what do I think about Nazi deniers? I think I don't give it much thought. It used to make me mad, but I think that they know what happened, and they just say that it didn't happen. Um, that's what I feel, and you can't change them. Maybe by example or anything, but I stay away from them, and I don't like them. I don't want anything to do with them.
Okay, do you still play the piano and some kind of music that you played for Ursula?
Do I still play the piano? Yes, I do. Uh, I play every day. I can't read notes, but I play. I used to play in bars and stuff, and I play that. I play harmonica and flute, but I'm not technically trained. And I still play those songs that I played for Ursula. Yes, for my grandkids. Those are songs that my mother sang. I still play those. All my kids they know those songs.
Okay, do you ever have nightmares about your past?
Do I ever have nightmares about my past? I've had them. Uh, not so much anymore, but I do get them maybe once a year, but less than that. But I used to get them more often.
Okay, you talked about people you forgave throughout your story. How do you forgive?
How, boy, that's a tough question. I have forgiven people uh, partially for my own sake. You know, you can't walk around hating, walking around the streets hating it all the time. That's bad for you. And so I say to myself, I will forgive someone if they're truly sorry and what they did, because what they did was horrendous. And thank God I've never met anybody personally that was involved. So it's easy for me to say I forgive. Maybe if I met someone, if they said I'm not sorry, then I don't think I could forgive him.
Do you remember practicing religion with your family when you were young, and do you still practice?
Do I remember practicing religion? Uh, we were in a Jewish house, and you know there are different degrees of practicing Judaism. We went to the synagogue every once in a while, maybe 3 times a year. I did go learn how to do Hebrew writing and all that, but and then when I ended up with the nuns, it was my mother's wish. I was baptized Catholic, and so on my army dog tags, it says C, Catholic. But when it comes to religion now at this age, I kind of just believe in God or something like that. I'm not really going into churches or anything too much.
Okay, do you feel a weight off your shoulders now that you share your story?
Do I feel a weight uh, off me now that I share my stories? Yes, I really do. I don't like to talk about the Holocaust at parties or anything like that. But to tell you the truth, when I give these talks, this is the first time I did it this way, like on a computer type. When I do it in person, it helps me. I like to do it. I don't feel more, but any other time, I don't want to talk about the Holocaust. This is good. I feel like I'm doing something, and uh, and that's that. Yes.
Okay, and lots of questions about what is the name of your book.
Oh, the name of my book is called Lucy's Hope. Now, my mother's name was Lucy Hope. Lucy spelled Lucie, and her hope was to save her children, and she did. And because I'm still here, my sister died last year of natural causes. She lived in Skokie, Illinois. And so this book is available in some bookstores, but you can also get it on Amazon and places like that.
Okay, so lots of thank yous and congratulations on your marriage and your family. And the final.
Oh, I have to say, come up with a final thing, and that would be, that sounds stupid, but one thing I did in life is learn how to fly a plane. And I really enjoyed that, and I used to go flying all over the place. Had a hard time getting my kids to come with me, except Lucy. That's helping me here today. She was the first one, my first passenger, and she always went. But to be serious for a minute, what was that? I should give advice.
The final word.
Oh, a final word is that you should not worry too much about things and just go along in life, and everyone suffers. Everyone has good things, and that's just the way life is, and things will work out uh, always, as far as I can see. Thank you. Did I sound okay?